as I was saying, you probably don't want to Google chastity belt, but since some of you did, great example of building a fence around the law, putting some cautionary tape, so to speak, around something you don't want to eat or get to, or a law you don't want to break. Jewish rabbis just tended to teach like that, building a fence around the law. But you can probably think, and you've probably already had the thought, doesn't that get trickier or stickier? Because say there's a law you don't want to break. Thou shalt not pig out. So you build a fence around that law, and you build another fence. And by the time you're done, you can have hundreds. In fact, the Jews had either 613 or 619, depending how you count. Eventually they had that many laws. And so you can see what started out pretty well gets real legalistic potentially. So remember that. If you want to make it easier not to break a law, say, I don't want to eat these fortune cookies, so I could say, well, you only can eat them with chopsticks. That would make it pretty hard, pretty impossible for me, if you know me. So, many years ago, I'm in Paraguay. We're building a church. I had a great time teaching the kids. There's a story about Julio I'll tell you later in the class. Here's one of the beautiful kids I had a chance to teach in Paraguay, but here's the story. So we're taking a break from building a church, which is good for me. I don't really know how to build a church, so I'm enjoying. There's a group of maybe 15 or so, and some are the indigenous people, some are the missionaries, some are the workers. We're all just taking a break, and somehow a spontaneous or spiritaneous conversation on the Sermon on the Mount came up. And specifically, this whole thing of murder, anger, sense the same thing. So most of us knew that scripture as we were looking at it. I decided to try something that, let me put it this way, the next thing I said was totally from God or totally stupid, maybe a bit of both. So I turned to someone I knew well. I'm going to change the name to protect the guilty. And I'll never forget, to this day, I looked at him and we were joking a minute before, and someone had said, hey, have you ever committed murder? And someone would say, well, you know, but I've committed anger. I've been angry with you, so, but it's all forgiven, right? Just laugh it off. So what I said next, just thought to illustrate the same point in a lighthearted manner, I said, John, so you ever committed adultery? Can you guess what he said? Can you guess what he did? He didn't say anything. He didn't do anything other than turn white, and he'd been outed right there. We all knew immediately that he'd literally committed literal adultery just by his reaction. And so don't worry, it turned out okay. It's all been confessed. It was all forgiven. But this just shows you how practical this whole building a fence around the law kind of thing is. So when you look at those 6 case studies, take a look at them if you want to, from verses 21 to 48, 6 of them. We only talked about 2. And think about, I know we talked about easier or harder, but ignore that for now, set that aside and say, what words come to mind for this shift in the law? What's he doing, moving from murder to anger, moving from adultery to lust? Here's just one more random one. He says at one point in those 6, he says, you have heard that it was said in the old days by the first Moses, don't swear by Jerusalem. But I'm saying to you, don't swear at all. So think about some words that come to mind. Call them out right now. Your family will think you're crazy, but just say it out loud. But sometimes students say, what's he doing? How would you define the shift if it's not easier or harder? What's he doing? Let me put it this way. He's making it more fill in the blank. Sometimes students say interior, practical, very interesting, specific, accessible. I don't know what you're thinking, but right now, hang on to the word amplify and read about that in the forum below. But I had a special guest today. That was Julio. Glad you got to meet him, even though he's all grown up now. But to take it a little further, this whole discussion on building a fence around the law, I want to introduce you to someone you met last week, the lawfully wedded wife. Watch and listen carefully.